Imagine spending 40 hours researching a $50,000 purchase online. You compare all the specs, you read the reviews, you calculate the financing down to the absolute penny.
Oh, it was an exhausting process. We all do it.
Right, and then you finally walk into a physical store. You were
You?
completely ready to buy, and the very first thing the salesperson asks you is, what color were you thinking?
Yeah, it completely shatters the entire experience right
It
there.
really does. Welcome to Auto News Talk. Looking at the stack of auto industry research you sent us, we're answering one massive question here. Why is the gap between the digital car buyer and the physical showroom wider than ever?
And, how are these massive economic pressures making it so much worse?
Exactly. We are looking at a real collision course here. You have macroeconomic pressure cooker conditions that are forcing local dealers to fundamentally rethink their inventory.
While at the exact same time, that digital to physical handoff you just mentioned is becoming the ultimate make or break moment for their survival.
So to navigate this terrain, we have 5 incredibly detailed sources to guide us. And success in this environment, it isn't about having the perfect crystal ball.
No, not at all. You have to understand that agility is everything. It is about the ability to synthesize incoming information and constantly adapt to a consumer whose reality is shifting.
Right, so let's start by looking inside the buyer's wallet because global economic forces are drastically altering local purchasing decisions.
They are. To really grasp what is happening on the local dealership lot, you have to start with the macro pressures.
So let's unpack the mechanics of that. The first source we have is a market brief by Cox Automotive, and it paints an incredibly stark picture of that buyer's wallet.
It really does. We aren't just talking about some abstract idea of inflation here.
No, the brief outlines a brutal convergence. We are talking about higher fuel costs, geopolitical risk, and the Federal Reserve holding interest rates steady.
And those three forces combined are just heavily dampening consumer confidence across the board.
But let's get into the nuts and bolts of the why. How exactly does a Federal Reserve policy decision functionally change the physical layout of a local car lot?
Well, it comes down to something called floor plan financing. A lot of people just assume dealerships buy their cars outright from the manufacturer.
Right, like they just write a check for 50 cars.
Exactly, but they don't. They use a massive line of credit, the floor plan, to actually finance that inventory.
Wait, so the dealer lot is basically a perishable goods aisle.
I love that. That is the perfect way to look at it. Cars are not non-perishable goods, they are milk.
They are milk. Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, and high interest rates act as a ticking expiration clock on the profitability of that milk.
Wow.
With the Fed signaling no rate cuts, the daily interest charge on a $50,000 vehicle just sitting on the asphalt is enormous.
So under like 0% interest policies,
Yeah.
a dealer could afford to let a car sit for 90 days without sweating too much.
Exactly. But in a high-rate environment, every single day that car sits, it mathematically erases the profit margin.
Which means the dealer is absolutely desperate to move the metal quickly.
Ah.
But according to the Cox brief, the buyer is actually moving slower than ever.
Right, they are hitting the brakes hard.
There is a specific detail in that brief that completely blew my mind. These exact fuel and rate pressures are literally extending shopping timelines.
Consumers are dragging out the process. They are paralyzed by the numbers, desperately trying to recalibrate their math to make the monthly payment actually fit.
But the brief does highlight a fascinating counterweight to this whole affordability crisis. It points to a second set of data we are looking at, an expanding supply of pre-owned electric vehicles.
Yeah, the used EV market. Off-lease EVs are returning to the market in really high numbers.
Which is drastically broadening the selection in the used channels.
And dealers can leverage this to meet those tough payment targets for price-sensitive buyers.
Wait, I have to push back on that a little bit. I struggle to buy that as a total safety valve for the whole market. Well, used EVs are notoriously hard to value because of battery degradation. Are dealers really jumping to stock their lots with off-lease EVs when the battery health could completely tank their margins?
It is a totally valid point. It is a calculated risk, absolutely, but the math is kind of forcing their hand.
Because the buyer is just terrified of sustained gas price increases.
Exactly. The Cox brief specifically notes that fuel costs are heightening operating cost concerns for households, and they are terrified of high loan rates.
Right, so a used EV offers a lower acquisition cost than a new one, plus significantly lower fueling and maintenance costs.
Suddenly, the monthly math works for a budget-conscious household. The wholesale auctions are actually showing firmer demand and improving sales performance for these specific vehicles.
Because the dealers literally need them to meet those difficult payment targets. But the pipeline for those vehicles isn't guaranteed, is it?
No, not at all.
The same brief warns that tariffs and evolving trade agreements could heavily impact supply chains for both new and used inventory.
Precisely. The supply of parts and vehicles remains highly vulnerable to shifting global policies.
And that introduces a really critical limitation in the macro data we are looking at.
Yeah, a big one. The brief explicitly admits there are deep measurement questions around economic productivity.
Especially during periods of rapid tech adoption, like the EV transition.
Right. The ultimate takeaway is that this top-level macroeconomic data might just remain highly noisy and incredibly hard to read.
Which brings up an obvious operational problem. If the macro data like inflation, trade tariffs, and fuel prices is too noisy to trust, how does a local dealer know what to actually pay for that used EV?
They certainly can't just guess.
Right. If affordability is dead and margins are razor thin, how do they price the cars without losing their shirts?
They have to rely on wholesale auction data to act as their radar. Which brings us to the third source you shared, the updated Cox Automotive Dealer Market Forecasts.
Ah, okay. Let's dive into that.
This forecast package adjusts projections across the board. We are talking new and used sales, fleet activity, leasing, everything.
And the absolute heartbeat of those forecasts is our fourth crucial piece of data, the Manheim Used Vehicle Value Index. Let's dig into how that actually functions because it is brilliant.
It really is. It is important to note it doesn't track retail prices.
Right. It aggregates wholesale auction data.
Exactly. Dealers go to massive closed wholesale auctions to buy the used inventory they eventually sell to the public. Manheim tracks the final hammer price of millions of those transactions.
And then it adjusts the data for things like mileage, condition, and seasonal shifts, right?
Yes, and it spits out a single index number. It acts as an early read on wholesale pricing, and that wholesale movement always leads retail price movement.
So why does that matter on the ground? Explain the actual stakes for a dealership manager who is just staring at that index on their computer screen.
The stakes are absolute financial survival. These index movements and the broader forecast directly inform a dealership's entire inventory planning process.
Give me a real-world scenario for that.
Okay, say the Manheim Index indicates that wholesale prices for compact SUVs are softening.
Meaning they're getting cheaper at auction.
Right. But if a dealer misreads that signal and continues buying them at a premium at auction, they ruin their acquisition costs.
Oh, wow.
They become trapped holding depreciating assets they cannot sell profitably while paying that massive daily floor plan interest we talked about earlier.
The milk is expiring.
Exactly. The milk is expiring, and they paid too much for it to begin with. It dictates their incentive strategies and even shapes the risk models lenders use to approve consumer loans.
It is high-stakes poker with millions of dollars on the table. But here's where it gets incredibly frustrating for anyone trying to follow along. You pointed this out when you sent the materials over.
The public summary issue.
Yes. If you read the public web summary of this update, they don't actually give you the detailed numbers or the macro rate assumptions.
It is a glaring limitation of the public-facing summary.
It forces stakeholders to download the full, dense forecast package just to get the actual figures. The public summary acts as more of a strategic directional arrow than a detailed map.
It tells you the wind is changing direction, but it makes you do a ton of legwork to find out exactly how hard it is blowing.
Which underscores just how proprietary and valuable this data really is.
The people who hold the data hold all the leverage.
So let's connect the dots on what we have so far before we move to the final piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
On one side, we have rate-weary, budget-stressed consumers who are extending their shopping timelines and calculating every single dollar, driven by the pressures outlined in the market brief.
And on the other side, we have dealerships sweating over their daily floor plan interest, carefully managing their acquisition costs, and trying not to get burned by wholesale price swings.
All while relying on those Manheim forecasts. The tension is at a boiling point before the two parties even meet in person.
Exactly. By the time that stressed buyer actually engages with the dealership, their patience is at zero.
They have done hours of research, they have stressed over the loan rates, and they just want a seamless process.
Which brings us to the physical showroom experience itself and our fifth source.
The digital to physical handoff. Think about what the current online to offline car buying process actually feels like for a second.
Yeah, it can be pretty rough.
It is exactly like calling your internet provider's customer service line. You navigate the web portal, you finally get a human on the phone, you explain your incredibly complex router problem, and what do?
They transfer you to another department.
Yes, and you have to re-explain your entire problem from scratch to a brand new person. It completely shatters your trust in the company's competence.
It is infuriating. And according to an opinion piece from Digital Dealer about unifying the buyer experience, that handoff in the automotive space is fundamentally broken.
The central insight they offer is that internal operational silos force customers to endlessly repeat information.
Right. So what does a silo actually look like inside a dealership?
Well, think of a dealership not as one single business, but as several separate businesses sharing a roof. You have the internet sales team managing the website leads. You have the floor sales team taking walk-ins. You have the finance and insurance office writing the loans. And you have the service department fixing the cars.
And historically, none of their software systems talk to each other.
Exactly. The solution the digital dealer piece proposes is unifying all of that first-party data and using artificial intelligence to maintain context across the entire buyer journey.
Okay, but how does that actually work mechanically? How does a local dealer connect my late-night web browsing to my physical walk-in?
It requires breaking down the walls between the website's analytics, the customer relationship management software, the CRM, and the physical sales desk.
So when you browse the dealer's website, cookies and tracking pixels monitor your behavior.
Right. If you submit a lead or value your trade-in, that web data is tied to your profile in the CRM. The AI then acts as the bridge.
So when you walk in and give your name, the salesperson pulls up your profile, and the AI instantly summarizes your entire digital footprint.
The opinion piece gives a highly specific, practical scenario for this that just sounds like the holy grail for a car buyer.
Oh, I read that part. It sounds amazing.
Imagine you walk into the showroom, and the staff immediately acknowledges the recent comparisons you made online. They know the exact video content you viewed. They know the specific safety features that prompted your inquiry in the first place.
Because they have that rich context, they can focus strictly on your unresolved gaps.
Right. They aren't asking you for your budget or what color car you might be interested in.
They are picking up the conversation exactly where the website left off.
It sounds like a total dream. But the piece argues it can no longer be just a dream.
The implication here is that this level of continuity is no longer a luxury perk. It is a baseline expectation from modern consumers.
They expect the physical brick-and-mortar store to have the exact same memory as the website checkout cart.
Furthermore, this transparency and data continuity must extend past the initial sale and into ownership.
Which is where the service department silo comes in.
Right. Instead of blasting generic spam emails, asking a customer to trade in a car they just bought,
or offering an oil change special on a fully electric vehicle that doesn't even use oil.
which happens all the time. But instead of that, the dealer uses that continuous data loop. They tailor service reminders to specific models and individual ownership milestones.
It preserves the trust built during the sale. I love the vision, but I have to point out a massive, glaring limitation in this argument.
Yeah, there is a big war.
What this opinion piece doesn't answer is the raw cost, or the immense risk involved.
It completely ignores it.
It confidently asserts that AI is going to magically fix these operational silos, but it completely fails to quantify the implementation costs.
Upgrading enterprise software, integrating APIs across legacy dealership systems, and training staff to actually use AI is incredibly expensive.
And we just established earlier that margins are being eaten alive by floor plan interest. Where does the money for this tech overhaul actually come from?
It is a massive blind spot in the article.
And it also ignores the very real privacy considerations of harvesting all this first-party data.
Oh, the privacy liability is huge.
Tracking every click, video view, and comparison a user makes online, storing it in a CRM, and handing it to a commissioned salesperson. That comes with massive data security baggage.
If there is a data breach, the liability is staggering. You cannot deploy comprehensive AI-driven tracking without deeply addressing consumer privacy expectations.
Not to mention the sheer financial burden of the software. The technology might exist, but the execution is fraught with risk.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this market?
We have covered an immense amount of ground here.
We really have. We have gone from the massive floor plan financing and global inflation pressures in the Cox brief to wholesale auction indexes from Manheim to the privacy risks of showroom AI from Digital Dealer.
If we step back and synthesize all 5 of these sources, we start to see a very clear defining picture of the automotive landscape.
I see 3 distinct themes emerging from this information.
Okay, let's hear them. Lay it out for us.
First, volatility is the permanent new normal.
Oh, that is definitely clear.
We saw that supported by the Cox Market Brief detailing the unpredictable, chaotic mix of fuel prices and Federal Reserve actions.
Right.
And we saw it mechanically in the Cox forecasts, which have to constantly adjust their wholesale projections to match wild demand shifts. Stability is just a concept of the past.
Okay, so volatility is the baseline. What is the second theme?
Second, data is the ultimate currency.
Yeah, no question there.
This is supported by the industry's heavy reliance on the Manheim Index wholesale data just to avoid financial ruin on the lot. It is also supported by the digital dealer piece, arguing that first-party showroom data is the only viable way to save the customer relationship.
The dealerships that interpret the data fastest will win the market.
Exactly. And the third theme is that a budget-conscious consumer desperately needs friction removed from the process.
The macro pressures are simply too high for them to tolerate operational incompetence.
Right. This is supported by the strategy of using pre-owned EVs as an affordability safety valve and by the aggressive push for an AI-driven, unified showroom experience that respects the buyer's time.
That makes perfect sense. But looking at these themes, it also creates some serious, unavoidable friction for the people actually trying to run these businesses.
How do you mean?
Well, there are two massive tensions hiding in those themes.
There absolutely are. The first major tension is the intense conflict between the types of data dealers are forced to use.
Unpack that a bit.
Well, on one hand, you have the noisy, uncertain macroeconomic data dictating the broader market, the fuel prices, the inflation numbers, which the sources admit are incredibly hard to read with precision.
Right, the global noise.
But on the other hand, dealers are being told they must collect and perfectly execute on hyper-specific, intent-driven first-party data from their own websites.
It is a brutal tension. It is this wild juxtaposition between global, chaotic uncertainty and the demand for hyper-local surgical precision.
The dealer is essentially saying, we have no idea what the global supply chain or the Federal Reserve is doing, but we know exactly which trim level you hovered your mouse over at 2 in the morning.
It is so bizarre when you put it like that. And the second tension is about access to that very data.
Yeah, the hidden numbers.
We know the market is shifting. The Cox forecasts prove that the wholesale ground is constantly moving. But there is a massive tension in the fact that the exact numbers and detailed macro assumptions aren't just handed out in the public web updates.
They force dealers and industry watchers to dig deeper. They have to download the massive packages and actively hunt for the granular insights they need to survive.
Which brings us to the practical application of all this complexity, the real so what for the industry.
The ultimate takeaway here is about focusing on what you can actually control.
Dealerships cannot control the Federal Reserve. They cannot control global gas prices, trade tariffs, or the macro noise.
But they can absolutely control their local inventory mix.
Right. They can lean into that expanding supply of used EVs to meet the consumer exactly where their stretched budget sits.
And even more importantly, they must eliminate the friction in their physical showroom.
They have to treat the customer's digital footprint not as an isolated, meaningless data point, but as the literal starting line of the in-person conversation.
The digital and the physical can no longer be two different worlds. They have to bridge that gap seamlessly.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on regarding that gap, building on all this source material.
Oh, I like where this is going.
We have talked extensively about how dealerships are using this massive trove of CRM and website data to track the customer's every move.
Right.
If transparency and seamless data sharing become the absolute baseline expectation for selling a car, how long until the power dynamic completely flips?
What do you mean?
How long until consumers who are armed with more research than ever start demanding to see the exact same real-time wholesale data like the Manheim Index that the dealers are using to price the cars?
Oh, wow.
Think about it. If the dealer knows everything about the buyer's online history, the buyer is eventually going to demand to know the exact acquisition math behind the sticker price on the windshield.
That would completely rewrite the rules of negotiation. It would strip away the very last bit of asymmetry in the car buying process.
It really would. Well, thanks for joining us for this segment of Auto News Talk. Keep questioning the data, keep an eye on how these local showrooms adapt to those massive global pressures, and we'll see you next time.